Paths That I Feel. Great song. So the talk today is about the second aspect of living in spiritual solution. And last week I talked about the business that Wayne Dyer mentions when he says, when we live in the house of knowledge versus the house of uncertainty, that's where we run into problems. Living in the house of knowledge, living in what we think we know, versus learning how to live in the uncertainty. So I'm going to have Reverend Carla read to you from the front of your program something that Dr. Wayne Dyer talks about how to stay in uncertainty and actually be comfortable. Right?
A belief is generally something that comes to us from outside of ourselves. It's the culture we're immersed in. It's the people who raised us. It's the book that we've read. It's all of the forces that have been impinging upon us in order to get us to change or to be what they think we should be. Whereas a knowing is something that comes from within. For example, knowing how to swim doesn't come from someone else showing you, or someone else telling you, or watching movies of other people swimming. It comes from having been in the water, knowing how to move yourself through the water and not sink. And it's true that of virtually everything of our lives, knowing comes from direct experience. There's a difference between knowing God and knowing about God. Knowing about God is all of the stuff we've been told in all of the books that we've read and all of the religious experiences of what others have told us and tried to convince us of. But knowing God is when we make conscious contact. And that's why making conscious contact is so important and such an important part of the healing process. In the world of healing, when a knowing confronts a belief in a disease process, the knowing will always triumph. It takes an abandonment of a tribal consciousness to get to a place where we can say, I know I can heal myself. It's banishment of all doubt. Wayne Dyer.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it. So Dyer is saying that we have to abandon all our doubt, and we have to stop living in what we know, or we think we know, and start living in, although he didn't say that particular piece, but he's inferring that we have to learn how to live in uncertainty. And living in uncertainty, as I said last week, is not fun, it's certainly not enjoyable, unless you have some philosophy or some way to understand how to do that. When I was going to college, Cal State University, Los Angeles, back in the early 60s, and I came in as a freshman in 1965, or 64, one of the things they made you do was you had to take a PE class. That was a state college requirement. And so they would test you in these various things that you, like social dancing, archery, golf, swimming, and stuff like that. So you'd have to go through and take these batteries of tests. Now, I took archery. I wasn't very good at it, so I thought, well, sure, they'll assign me archery. I did play golf, so I was okay with that. Social dancing, I was, but swimming, I played water polo in high school. I was a pretty good swimmer, but the pool was closed that day. So naturally, the class that I got assigned to was swimming. So here I am going to college. My first PE class is swimming, and I go up to the instructor and I say, I know how to swim. There was a mistake. The pool was closed. I swim a few laps, and I can do a side stroke, I do the butterfly stroke, and he says, doesn't matter, you're in the class, get used to it. You ever had those experiences? Get used to it. So I'm in the class, and I'm thinking to myself, oh man, what a waste of my time. Well, I know how to do this already. And there's people over here who are they're so frightened of getting in the water, they're like 15 feet back from the pool. Even get them to approach the water is a miracle. So the instructor had us lay on the ground and do the side stroke out of the water. It seems kind of foolish, but he was trying to inform them they could do the stroke, and once they were in the water and they got comfortable, it would work. But you see, there's no knowing until you get in the water. You can't understand what it means to swim until you actually get in the water and do it. Same thing with spirit. You can't know spirit until you get in the water and swim in the emotional sea that we're all swimming in, and learn how to stay afloat. More importantly, learn how to live in that emotional sea without drowning or without having the fear of drowning. But I watched people, and if you have a terror of the water or the fear of anything like that, it's palpable, it's real. And some of the people, we really had to just coax them to the side, and some of them literally got on their butts and they just kind of scooted over. They were just terrified. And then just to get them to put their feet in the water. And for some of you that are used to swimming, you're thinking to yourself, what's the big deal? But if you've got a fear, that fear is unbelievably real. And finally you get in the water, and finally you learn how to float, and finally you start to apply. And I was working with people because he knew I was capable of that. I wasn't certified in teaching people how to swim, but I could certainly hold somebody up while I floated. And so just my presence, I knew why I was there. But at the time, I wasn't really conscious of it. Why are we anywhere in relative to certain people who have certain fears? Have you ever had that experience where you're in a certain situation, you're saying, why do I have to do this? Why can't somebody else do this? It's because you have a knowing, not a knowledge, a knowing that's really helpful to another human being. And that's part of the thing that has to happen if you're going to live in spiritual solution. Spiritual solution means that there's a fluidity of feeling and not a fixed sense of position. So a lot of people take a fixed sense of position economically or psychologically or spiritually or religiously or any other way you want to think. They take a fixed position, and that fixed position looks like it should be pretty solid, but the problem is, could that fixed position be an anchor that goes to the bottom, that sinks every time it gets into a position where it should learn how to float, and it can't float because it's too fixed in its position? And so you sink sometimes, and that sinking is the terror that you might die. You might not live through this. I know everybody in this room at some point or another has gone through an experience where you didn't know if this didn't work or if that failed, that was the end. And of course it wasn't the end, but in your mind it was the end. You were fixed in that position. So Dyer says you have to learn how to get rid of bad beliefs. Bad beliefs, things that you've been told, things that you've learned by observation, things that people have demonstrated for you. And you're thinking, man, but that belief is so important, because if I don't believe in that, then I might break the tribal code. I might actually be kicked out of the tribe. And some of you in this room have been kicked out of your tribes. Some of you have been kicked out of your religion. Some of you have been taking a lot of heat, especially when Christmas and Easter and holidays roll around. You got to talk to those relatives who are saying, you still in that crazy-ass religion? I certainly have taken that heat from time to time. And of course, it's pointless to try to explain. No, I've learned how to swim, and I've learned how to understand myself. I've learned how to live in peace. I've learned how to practice love, acceptance, and forgiveness, which is what I talked about last week. I talked about the difference between living in the house of knowledge. A lot of times there is no love in the house of knowledge, just judgment, just an opinion. And of course, it's always good to be right, even at the expense of alienating everybody in your life. But those people don't matter anyway, do they? They don't count. I can dismiss them. Can you? It's such a weird thing to have to live in that feeling of being right. And then you realize being right at the expense of giving up loved ones, that's not worth it. And it's hard. It's not easy to give up your position. I know. I've held on to my position pretty doggone hard. Sometimes when people come into my office for counseling, I have them hold up a pencil. I said, this is the torch of righteousness. You hold this, you're always right. But nobody will come near you. Nobody. Because you know why? It's because they will make you wrong so they can remain right. Making other people wrong so I can be right doesn't work. It never has worked, but a lot of religions are based upon that. A lot of religions are based upon making you wrong so I can be right. And so then when you say to yourself, no, you're right and I'm right, and we both have a different opinion, we both have a different viewpoint. But people who need to be right can never understand that argument, can they? They can never allow that to happen, because that would mean that they'd have to admit that the way you're living your life is as sane as the way they're living their life. So walking away from that tribal pressure, that's a pretty big deal. That's a pretty big deal because you got to have a place where you know you can come and you can hang out with people who believe like you believe, who love like you love, who forgive like you forgive, who accept like you accept. And when you do that, it's just a tremendous sense of well-being in the house. Well-being. But that's the first thing you got to do. So love, acceptance, and forgiveness I talked about last week. Now you got to also learn how to clean your consciousness, clean the energy. Clean the energy. How do you do that? How do you clean your energy? Well, a lot of people are unprepared for that because a lot of people are still scrubbing with no soap. Can you imagine doing the dishes with no soap? You get out the brush and you say, well, the brush is good enough. It just kind of scrapes all the food away. But what doesn't it do? It doesn't clean up the bacteria. It certainly doesn't clear out all the junk. So you use soap. Well, in our teaching, we use principles to scrub ourselves and clean ourselves. But if you don't take a shower every day, does it not become apparent? And you're the only one that doesn't know. You don't smell yourself. I mean, you don't stink. You got to think about this for just a minute. So the way you behave and the way you live your life and how clean you are has to come from a principle. Utilizing a principle. You've heard me say this before. You got to use a principle. Now, what's a principle? It's a defining mechanism that doesn't have to be right in order to exist. I'll say it again. A defining mechanism that doesn't have to be right to exist. It just is. And the most powerful one, love. Love doesn't have to be right. It just is. And certainly there's been a lot written in the Bible about that. Love, Corinthians, and love is not bold, it's not prideful, it's not this, that, and anything. Love just is. But what about peace? Peace just is too. So is joy. So is life. So is light. So is truth. So is beauty. It just is. Beauty just is. And when you learn that, and you start to apply the principle to the condition, you're scrubbing clean the inner thoughts that you have about who you are. You're scrubbing clean. You're wiping away all the doubt that you're lovable. Listen to that. Wipe away the doubt that you're lovable. And when you realize how lovable you are and you're clean, people go, somebody new's in the room. Somebody worth standing next to. Oh, I sense a powerful sense of goodness here. People sense that. They know it. Just like they know when you're afraid. Just like they know when you're seeing a sense of love and peace. And you become, get this, the organizing principle. You begin to actually organize life around you. Love organizes you. Peace organizes you. But it orders you in a completely different way. It doesn't like stack things up and label things and judge things and weigh things and compare things and analyze things. Peace doesn't do any of that stuff. Peace just is a presence which is so powerful that it begins to just present you as an acceptable, loving person who is here on the planet to express, experience, and be peaceful. And you think, so what's that got to do with anything? But think how different your life would be if you were that way consistently. That rhymed, didn't it? Think how different your life would be if you were that way consistently. So consistency is a requirement. How do you stay clean? I mean, you can get clean, but then you're going to get, or as they say in England, dirty. You're going to get dirty, which means that you're going to acquire old beliefs. You're going to buy into old habits. Just as Rob saw, those habits that I feed. What do I feed them? I feed them my sense of well-being. I feed them my sense of goodness, my sense of peace of mind. Why are you feeding them? Because you don't know any better. Nobody ever taught you how to live your life. Nobody ever demonstrated by being that peace in your presence. Because if they had, you would have seen it instantly. But when you're around here, you'll start to see it. You'll start to see people behaving that way. You'll start to see people talking that way. Not 100%, but pretty close. So close that you'll go, Anybody have any dogs at home? Is your dog ever, like when you're unaware, you're just sitting there and your dog just comes up and puts that little cold nose on your arm? What is the dog saying to you? Love me. I'm lovable. I'm at peace. Throw the ball. Toss me a bone. Give me a cookie. Do something sweet. When you finally clean yourself up, that's when life becomes. You know, it's impossible to describe it because it becomes so much more wonderful. It's like this. A lot of people, this is an example I give a lot of people. A lot of people start out, they come into church this way. They're just really off balance. They're out of kilter. And they go get a prayer. By the way, if you've got a problem and you don't go get a prayer, you ain't got a prayer. Now, that's true. You ain't got a prayer. We have practitioners in there specifically to listen and treat and pray for you. Why? Because we don't want you to leave here unhealed, at least in their mind. They want you. It's very important for you to go get that prayer. A number of people have come to me and often said, you know, it's when I first went and got a prayer that I could see the result. That's like saying the person who learned how to swim first got in the pool. Prayer is the entrance into the pool. It means that you actually tried it. And hey, you know, I got some results from that. Try it again, more results. When you get a little prayer, then you go to church every Sunday. Let's talk. Let's talk about going to church every Sunday. I started in 1972 in this teaching. For about 6 years, we'd go off and on. Every time I went, I always felt better. But it took me about 6 years to figure out, see church, feel better. I know it sounds like a crazy equation, but I go to church, I actually feel better, and it lasts. And I don't go to church, I don't feel as good. And I go to church, I feel good. Do you get the picture? So I did, but it took me 6 years to get the picture. Then I started going to class. Wow, class, that was like 2 hours of intensely being fed something that was so delicious I didn't even know it existed. Hearing ideas and concepts and abilities and practical applications and people telling me their stuff and how they're healing. And pretty soon all of that began to build in this momentum. And then I say, oh, I don't need class anymore. I go away, and then pretty soon things go right back to being the way they were before. Well, what's the problem? And I said, go back to class. I got better. Stay out of class. I didn't. Better, didn't better. The application, the learning, the study. So every time you go to class, you do prayer, and this is when you start to balance, and pretty soon you literally fall into a new life. And that's when people come to me, gee, Dr. Jim, I don't know, it just happened out of the blue. I just all of a sudden I was healed. I had no more hatred for my mother, my father, my sister, my brother, my ex-wife, my husband, whatever. I had no more hatred. I couldn't feel, I couldn't remember what it felt like to be angry. That's the definition of healing. What's it take to get you there? I don't know. That's why I'm here. That's my job, is to take it to the pool and push in. But if, you know, you can stand up, but you don't realize that at first. You think you went into the deep end. I would never push into the deep end, at least not knowingly. There's a third thing too. So cleaning with principle is learning, coming to church, going to class, constantly studying. Third thing, to be elevated, to be lifted to a higher perception. Turrell was a famous Catholic mystical priest. He was so important in the world of theology and philosophy, the Catholic Church wanted to excommunicate him. And this is in the 30s and 40s, and he was writing amazing works, amazing stuff. And the Catholic Church was getting really nervous, and so they asked him, they said, we're going to excommunicate you, or you can go to China and practice anthropology, your other love. And Turrell was a very smart man. He said, well, I'll go to China. I'll practice anthropology. I love that too. And I'm going to continue to write. And here's the deal I'm going to make with you. When I die, you publish all my books. Well, the Catholic Church is a little short-sighted sometimes. they wound up publishing Theodore Chardin's books, and he had a huge impact in the late 60s, huge impact. And they didn't understand. But one of the stories that Theodore Chardin used in his explanation of how life operates, he says, it's like this beautiful mountain that people just love to look at. And one day a bunch of them got together and decided to climb the mountain. And they were so excited, and they gathered in the lodge. It was about 5 miles from the base of the mountain. They were celebrating, drinking, and eating, and just saying, God, this is going to be the best experience of their life. And they got up the next morning, and about a couple hundred of them started off towards the mountain. They got halfway there, and there was mosquitoes, and it was hot, and it was dusty, and half of them quit. They just quit. Oh, it's a great and grand and lofty idea, but it's too much work to get there. And the other half finally made it to the base of the mountain, and they go up halfway up the mountain, they get to this unbelievable, beautiful valley at the top of this part of this mountain. And it's a gorgeous meadow, and there's a babbling brook and azure skies. That's blue. Clear skies, and they lay in the grass and they could smell. It's like being in Yosemite and places like that, you just kind of smell the sweetness of life. And the other, about half of us said, we've arrived. We don't need to go any further. This is what life's about. So they only went part of the way. But the rest of the people said, no, we need to go the whole way. And so they left that camp and they passed the tree line. They got into the desolation, isolation factor. But they kept climbing, and when they got to the top, they saw something they'd never seen before. They saw their potential, and they marveled, and they sat in awe of this potential. And they said, God, it's so beautiful. I'm so glad I kept working at it. I'm so glad that I kept believing that there was something greater to see. And they saw it. And when they saw it, they couldn't describe it because it was too beautiful. And it was so panoramic, and it was so awesome. It had so much variety, and so much beauty, and so much life, and so much love that they felt that they couldn't describe it, but they knew it. And they were in solution. They were in the fluidity of the possibility. And they could feel it. It was palpable. It was real. And they shifted. And they never again doubted. You know, I've talked to people who've had those life after death experiences. Very much the same experience. You have nothing to fear. I mean that. They would say, you have nothing to fear. It's eternal. It goes on and on and on. And it's so amazing. Why wouldn't